Hello, and welcome to my talk, A Grounded Analysis of Player-Described Board Game Immersion. My name is Timea, and today I'm going to be talking about our study, which asked the questions of how board game players experience immersion, and how these experiences might differ from immersion in other media, such as video games. Whilst immersion in video games is studied extensively, this is not the case when it comes to board game immersion, and one of the reasons for this might be that we don't know what board game immersion is. So to answer these questions, we've started with sampling our data from board game specific forum discussion threads, such as Reddit and Board Game Geek, as these were the threads where users answered prompt questions such as, what is the most immersive board game you have ever played? So we chose these specifically because the questions were user-generated and they yielded rich and authentic discussions amongst the players themselves. In the end, we have collected a total of 220 forum comments, which we've supplemented by interviewing 5 board game players who we recruited through social media and open email calls. They were selected because they all identified as frequent players who also engaged in related discussions. We have analyzed our data following a standard grounded theory approach, and in the end, we arrived at the following findings. Board game players have their own definitions of immersion, which are rich, complex, and varying. And board gamers have power over their immersion in a way that maybe video game players do not. So, what do I mean by these two statements? First, whilst players talk about their immersive experiences in different ways, we found that these could be best described as waypoints between two ends of a spectrum, where at one end there is engrossment in the challenge of the game, and at the other end there is submergence into the game world. So we suggest that immersion for most players is some blend between these two. The difference between being immersed at one end of the spectrum and being immersed at the other end of the spectrum is that when players experience engrossment in challenge, they usually do not care about the game world, either because there isn't one or they simply neglect it, and they find immersion in strategic planning or having a high influence over the outcomes of the game. Experiences of submergence into the game world are essentially the exact opposite, where all players care about is the game world. If there isn't one, they might construct it for themselves. And players are also submerged in the unfolding narrative. Whether or not they are part of this narrative doesn't matter too much to them. These endpoints blend into each other to varying degrees, so we could find experiences where a player is still engrossed in challenge but is also interested in the game world. They might see it more as an outsider rather than being part of it. Or a player could care equally about gameplay and the game world, and maybe feel a sense of embodiment and identifying with their in-game characters. Or a player who is still very much submerged in the unfolding narrative could also want some influence over the events. Now, to answer the other question of how players have power over their immersion, players have conditions of immersion which need to be met in order for immersion to happen. These can come from the game itself. So, for example, players could require the game to have a certain theme, or the gameplay to have a certain level of difficulty, and so on. These can also come from what happens around the table, so the players themselves. For example, how players behave during gameplay, including the interaction between players, or the reaction to certain aspects of gameplay, or even some voluntary practices which are not strictly part of the game itself, such as role-playing their characters or using custom music to enhance a game's setting. Players who are playing the same game, however, might have differing conditions for being immersed. For example, one player might only become immersed if the whole group engages in voluntary role-playing, whilst another might only become immersed if the game has really challenging decisions and just wants to optimize for mechanics. In these cases, immersion can be broken to both of them, or even everyone else at the table because of these contradicting conditions. In other cases, however, all players might have the same conditions for immersion and can take initiative in forming their immersive experiences by all participating in the same voluntary activity, or even breaking the rules together in order to customize their experience. Being able to bend, modify, or even break rules to suit players' needs is due to board games being more open systems, allowing players to customize their experience even if the game in itself does not match their conditions of immersion. So together with the voluntary practices, this is how players gain power over their own immersion. So to summarize, immersion has different meaning to different players, and therefore players experience immersion differently. Immersion has conditions which need to be met in order for it to happen. Immersion can be broken, and players have power over their immersion through voluntary practices and by board games being more open systems. Thank you.